The morning sun peeked through the clouds as Captain Chen adjusted her casual blazer in the mirror. After 15 years on the force, she had mastered the art of looking professional even in civilian clothes. Her apartment walls were decorated with photos of her graduation from the police academy, her promotion ceremony, and countless community events where she'd worked to build bridges between law enforcement and local neighborhoods. As the first black female captain in the department's history, she had faced her share of challenges. But those challenges had only strengthened her resolve to create positive change from within. She grabbed her keys from the wooden bowl by the door, a handmade gift from local artists during last month's community fair. The drive to work was peaceful, with early autumn leaves dancing across the sidewalks. She hummed along to an old soul tune on the radio, thinking about the community outreach program she was planning to launch next month. The morning traffic moved steadily, and she decided she had time to stop for coffee at the local shop that had become part of her daily routine. The familiar bell chimed as she pushed open the door to Sweet Bean Cafe. The warm aroma of freshly ground coffee beans filled the air, mixing with the scent of just-baked pastries. Several regulars nodded hello: the elderly man who always read his newspaper in a corner, the college student with her laptop who practically lived there during finals week, and the kind-faced barista who already started preparing Captain Chen's usual order when she spotted her. The captain had chosen this particular coffee shop not just for its excellent brew, but because it served as a perfect microcosm of the community she protected. Business people in suits shared tables with construction workers on their breaks. Students chatted with retirees. It was exactly the kind of place that reminded her why she joined the force in the first place, to serve and protect everyone equally. She took her place in line, mentally reviewing her agenda for the day. There was a department meeting about updating patrol protocols, followed by a review of recent community feedback, and then she needed to finish that grant proposal for new de-escalation training equipment. Her phone buzzed with a message from her sister, sharing photos of her niece's first day of middle school. The line moved slowly but steadily. Captain Chen noticed a few new faces among the morning crowd, including a uniformed officer she didn't recognize. Must be one of the recent transfers from the downtown precinct, she thought, making a mental note to review the personnel files again. She believed in knowing every officer under her command, their strengths, their challenges, and their potential for growth. The captain smoothed down her blazer, feeling the familiar weight of her badge in her pocket. She never displayed it unnecessarily, preferring to let her actions speak louder than any symbol of authority. Years of experience had taught her that true respect wasn't demanded by a badge or a title, it was earned through consistent, fair treatment of others. Little did she know that this ordinary morning was about to become anything but routine. The peaceful atmosphere of the coffee shop was about to shatter, testing not just her authority as a captain, but the very principles she'd spent her career defending. As she stood in line, looking forward to her first cup of coffee, she had no idea that in just a few moments, this quiet morning would transform into a defining moment in her career and in the ongoing struggle for equality in law enforcement. The peaceful morning atmosphere in Sweet Bean Cafe suddenly shifted when the uniformed officer Captain Chen had noticed earlier made his way to the counter. Instead of joining the end of the line, he walked straight to the front, cutting past several waiting customers. The captain watched as an elderly woman with a cane had to step back to avoid being bumped. Captain Chen took a deep breath. As someone who believed in treating everyone with respect, she couldn't stay silent. "Excuse me, officer," she said politely, keeping her voice gentle but firm. "There are several people waiting in line. Perhaps you didn't notice." The officer turned around slowly, his face hardening as he looked at her. Officer Thompson, she could read his nameplate now, drew himself up to his full height. "I'm on duty," he said curtly, dismissing her with a glance. "I don't have time to wait around." "Being on duty doesn't mean we get to disregard common courtesy," Captain Chen responded, maintaining her calm demeanor. She noticed other customers watching the exchange, some nodding in agreement with her words. Thompson's face flushed red. He took a step toward her, entering her personal space. "Listen here," he growled, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "I don't know who you think you are, but you need to learn your place." The air in the cafe grew thick with tension. The barista behind the counter froze, coffee pot in hand. The college student who always sat in the corner looked up from her laptop, eyes wide. Even the morning chatter died down to uncomfortable silence. "My place," Captain Chen repeated quietly, standing her ground. "And where exactly do you think that is, Officer Thompson?" His hand shot out, gripping her arm. "Don't take that tone with me," he snarled, his fingers digging into her blazer. "I'm an officer of the law, and you're just." The bell above the door chimed, and 3 officers walked in, engaging in casual conversation. They stopped abruptly at the scene before them. Captain Chen recognized Lieutenant Rivera and Officers Kim and Patel from the morning shift. Thompson's grip remained firm on her arm, but she could feel a slight tremor in his fingers. His eyes darted between her and his fellow officers, who stood frozen in the doorway. The lieutenant's face showed a mix of shock and growing anger. "I suggest," Captain Chen said, her voice carrying clearly in the silent cafe, "that you remove your hand from my arm, Officer Thompson." "Or what?" he challenged, but there was a note of uncertainty in his voice now. "You'll file a complaint? Do you know how many complaints like that go nowhere?" "Actually," Lieutenant Rivera spoke up, his voice tight with controlled anger, "I think you should listen to the captain, Thompson." "The what?" Thompson's face went from red to pale in an instant. "Captain Chen," Lieutenant Rivera continued, emphasizing her rank, "is your commanding officer, and you just committed assault against a superior officer, among other violations." The grip on her arm loosened immediately. Thompson stumbled back as if burned, his face a mask of dawning horror. The other customers in the cafe watched the scene unfold with a mixture of satisfaction and disbelief. Captain Chen straightened her blazer where Thompson had grabbed it, her movements deliberate and controlled. She could feel the eyes of everyone in the cafe on her, but she maintained her professional composure. This wasn't just about her anymore, it was about setting an example of how power should be wielded with responsibility and respect. "Officer Thompson," she said, her voice steady and clear, "I'm placing you on immediate administrative leave. Please surrender your badge and weapon to Lieutenant Rivera." She turned to address the other officers. "We'll need statements from everyone who witnessed this incident." The morning sun continued to stream through the cafe windows, illuminating dust motes in the air. The same coffee shop that had been a symbol of community harmony just moments ago had become the stage for a stark reminder of why her work was so important. As Thompson slowly unclipped his badge with shaking hands, Captain Chen knew this incident would have repercussions far beyond this morning, both for the department and for the community they served. The Sweet Bean Cafe had turned into a stage where time seemed to stand still. Officer Thompson's badge caught the morning light as it trembled in his hands, the metal reflecting tiny spots of sunlight onto the walls. His face had lost all color, making the dark circles under his eyes more prominent, evidence of what must have been a sleepless night shift. The other customers in the cafe watched the scene unfold with a mix of emotions written across their faces. The elderly woman who had been pushed aside earlier wore a satisfied smile. The college student had completely abandoned her laptop, her forgotten coffee growing cold beside her. The regular newspaper reader had lowered his paper, his reading glasses perched on the tip of his nose as he watched with undisguised interest. Lieutenant Rivera stepped forward, his shoes making soft sounds against the cafe's wooden floor. He held out his hand to receive Thompson's badge and weapon, maintaining a professional demeanor despite the anger visible in his clenched jaw. Officers Kim and Patel had positioned themselves near the door, their presence ensuring the situation remained under control. I didn't know," Thompson stammered, his previous arrogance evaporating like morning dew. His eyes darted between Captain Chen and his fellow officers, as if hoping to wake up from a bad dream. "Captain, I can explain." "The time for explanations will come during your disciplinary hearing," Captain Chen interrupted, her voice firm but not unkind. She rubbed her arm where his grip had left a mark, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by the other officers. "Right now, I need you to follow procedure." The barista, who had been frozen in place throughout the confrontation, suddenly sprang into action. She grabbed a paper cup and began preparing Captain Chen's usual order, an act of simple kindness that somehow made the moment more human. The familiar sound of the coffee machine provided a strange contrast to the tense atmosphere. Thompson's hands shook as he unclipped his holster. "My wife, my kids," he muttered, reality crashing down around him. This job is all I have. You should have thought about that before deciding who deserves respect and who doesn't, Lieutenant Rivera said quietly, accepting the surrendered items. The words hung in the air, heavy with truth. The morning sun continued to stream through the windows, catching dust motes in its beams. A delivery truck rumbled past outside, its driver unaware of the drama unfolding within. Life went on, even as Officer Thompson's world crumbled around him. Captain Chen took a deep breath, straightening her blazer one final time. She could feel the weight of the moment, knowing that what happened next would set a precedent. "Officer Kim," she said, "please escort Officer Thompson back to the precinct. Officer Patel, I need you to take statements from everyone here." The college student raised her hand slightly, like a student in class. "I got most of it on video," she said quietly. "He grabbed you right after you politely asked him to wait in line like everyone else." A murmur of agreement rippled through the cafe. Other customers nodded, pulling out their phones, indicating they too had captured parts of the incident. The power of technology and civilian oversight was making itself known, ensuring that this incident couldn't be swept under the rug like so many others before it. Thompson's shoulders slumped as he realized the full extent of his situation. The witnesses, the video evidence, the presence of other officers, everything had aligned to ensure his actions would have consequences. His face showed a mix of emotions: shame, fear, anger, and something else, perhaps the first glimmer of understanding about why his behavior had been so wrong. The captain watched as Officer Kim led Thompson toward the door. Just before they exited, she spoke one last time, her voice carrying clearly through the quiet cafe. "Officer Thompson," she called, causing him to turn back. "The uniform isn't what earns respect. It's how we treat people while wearing it." As they left, the tension in the cafe began to dissolve. The regular morning sounds slowly resumed, the hiss of the espresso machine, the clink of cups, the murmur of conversations. But something had changed. The customers looked at Captain Chen with new appreciation, seeing not just her authority, but the dignity with which she wielded it. The barista finally approached with her coffee. "It's on the house today, Captain," she said with a warm smile. "And maybe every day from now on." Captain Chen accepted the cup with a grateful nod, knowing that this morning would be remembered not just as a moment of confrontation, but as a turning point. Sometimes the biggest changes started with the smallest acts of standing up for what was right, even if it was just about waiting your turn in line for coffee. The next few hours at the precinct unfolded like scenes from a carefully choreographed dance. Captain Chen sat in her office, the morning coffee from Sweet Bean Cafe long since gone cold on her desk. The blinds were partially drawn, creating strips of light that cut across the room like bright bars on a dark canvas. Outside her office, she could hear the steady hum of activity: phones ringing, keyboards clicking, voices discussing the morning's events in hushed tones. Word had spread quickly, as it always did in a police department. Every few minutes, she caught snippets of conversations through her door. "Can you believe he grabbed her?" "Did you hear what happened at the coffee shop?" The captain's computer screen displayed multiple open windows, the incident report form she was filling out, Thompson's personnel file, and several email drafts to department heads. Her phone hadn't stopped buzzing with messages from other precinct captains and the police chief's office. Everyone wanted to know how she planned to handle this. A gentle knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. Lieutenant Rivera entered, carrying a stack of witness statements. "Just finished collecting all the accounts," he said, placing the papers on her desk. "The college student's video is clear as day. She uploaded it to her cloud drive and shared access with us. Smart kid." Captain Chen picked up the first statement, scanning the neat handwriting. "How's the mood out there?" she asked, glancing up at her longtime colleague. "Mixed," Rivera replied, settling into the chair across from her desk. "Most officers are angry at Thompson. They're saying he made us all look bad. A few are grumbling about excessive punishment for what they're calling a simple misunderstanding." He shook his head. "But they're the minority." The captain leaned back in her chair, considering his words. Through her office window, she could see officers at their desks, some sneaking glances her way. They weren't just watching their captain now, they were watching how the system would respond to one of their own crossing the line. "The community liaison office has been getting calls," Rivera continued. Local community leaders want to know if this is going to be handled differently than previous incidents. They're watching us closely. Captain Chen nodded, remembering the faces of the cafe customers who had witnessed everything. Good, she said firmly. Let them watch. Let them see that we're serious about accountability. Her computer chimed with a new email, the chief requesting an immediate video conference. As she reached for her mouse, Officer Patel appeared in the doorway, slightly out of breath. Captain, he said, Thompson's wife is here. She's asking to speak with you. The office fell quiet. Even the usual background noise seemed to dim. Captain Chen closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them with renewed determination. Send her in, she said. Lieutenant, please stay. Mrs. Thompson entered the office, her work badge from the local hospital still hanging around her neck. Her eyes were red, but her chin was held high. She sat down without being asked, her hands folded tightly in her lap. My husband, she began, then stopped to steady her voice. My husband has always been quick to anger. I've told him it would get him in trouble one day. She looked directly at Captain Chen. I'm not here to make excuses for him. I'm here to ask what he needs to do to make this right. The captain studied the woman before her, someone else affected by Thompson's actions, someone else caught in the ripples of that morning's events. Making it right starts with acknowledging what went wrong, she replied carefully. Your husband's actions weren't just about disrespecting me. They were about abusing his authority and showing prejudice in how he treats people. Mrs. Thompson nodded slowly. He needs help, she admitted. He's needed it for a while. I just hope this can be a wake-up call instead of the end of everything. 2 weeks after the coffee shop incident, the Internal Affairs Office buzzed with activity. Detective Wong from IA sat across from Captain Chen, spreading files across the conference room table. The fluorescent lights overhead cast a harsh glow on the growing stack of papers, each one a complaint against Officer Thompson from his previous precinct. We had to dig deep for these, Wong said, tapping a particularly thick folder. Some were buried in old filing systems, others were marked as resolved without any real investigation. She pushed her reading glasses up her nose, frustration evident in her gesture. There's a pattern here. Captain Chen picked up one of the files, reading through a complaint from 6 months ago. A young black business owner had reported Thompson for aggressive behavior during a routine license check. The incident had been dismissed as a misunderstanding. 5 similar complaints in 8 months at his last precinct. One continued, spreading out more papers. All filed by people of color. All mysteriously disappeared into the system. She paused, looking directly at the captain. Until now. The door opened, and Lieutenant Rivera entered with fresh coffee for everyone. The aroma helped cut through the tension in the room. The college student's video has over 100,000 views now, he reported, setting down the cups. Community organizations are calling it a turning point. Captain Chen nodded, remembering the young woman's quick thinking in recording the incident. What about the other witnesses from the cafe? All 12 have provided detailed statements, Rivera replied, pulling out his tablet. The barista's account was particularly thorough. She mentioned that Thompson had shown similar behavior before, but no one had ever challenged him. The captain stood up and walked to the window, watching officers come and go in the parking lot below. Each one represented both the problem and the potential solution. Have we heard anything from his former partners? Wong pulled out another file. 3 former partners came forward after seeing the video. They're willing to testify about his behavior patterns. One said he tried to report Thompson's conduct last year, but was told to handle it internally. The room fell quiet as they all absorbed the implications. This wasn't just about one incident in a coffee shop anymore. It was about a system that had allowed such behavior to continue unchecked. Captain Chen's phone buzzed. A message from Mrs. Thompson. His wife says he started counseling, she informed the others. She's grateful we're taking this seriously. Says it's the wake-up call he needed. Speaking of taking things seriously, Rivera interjected, pulling up an email on his tablet. The department's training division wants to use this case as part of their new bias awareness program. They're asking if you'd be willing to speak to the next class of recruits. The captain returned to her seat, picking up another complaint file. This one was from a teacher who'd been harassed during a traffic stop. We're not just investigating Thompson, she said firmly. We're investigating how he was allowed to continue this behavior for so long. I want to know who buried these complaints, who looked the other way, and why." Detective Wong nodded in agreement, pulling out her laptop. "I've been mapping the chain of command from his previous precinct. There are at least 3 supervisors who've signed off on dismissing valid complaints. They need to be held accountable too." The afternoon sun began to cast long shadows through the conference room blinds. Captain Chen looked at the faces around the table, dedicated officers committed to making real change. The coffee shop incident had cracked open a door, revealing years of systemic problems that could no longer be ignored. The police chief wants daily updates, Rivera mentioned, checking his phone. The mayor's office is watching too. They know this could be a watershed moment for the department. "It has to be," Captain Chen replied, her voice filled with determination. "Every one of these files represents someone who was wronged twice, first by Thompson's actions, then by a system that ignored their complaints." She gathered the files into neat stacks, each one representing a chance to right past wrongs. The investigation was revealing more than just one officer's misconduct. It was showing how small acts of looking the other way could create a culture of impunity. As the meeting wound down, Wong gathered her materials. "We'll have the full report ready by next week. It's going to make waves." "Good," Captain Chen responded, standing up. "Sometimes you need waves to clean things up." She looked at the pile of complaints one last time, thinking of all the voices that had gone unheard. This time, everyone's going to know that when someone speaks up, we listen. The investigation was far from over, but something had already changed. In precincts across the city, officers were watching, learning, and, most importantly, beginning to speak up when they saw something wrong. Sometimes it took one clear example of accountability to show everyone that change was possible. 1 month after the coffee shop incident, the precinct's largest meeting room was packed to capacity. Captain Chen stood at the podium, looking out at a sea of faces, officers, community leaders, and local residents who had come together for the first session of the department's new Community Bridge program. The room hummed with conversation as people who normally only met during tense situations sat side by side, sharing coffee and morning pastries. A local baker had donated treats from her shop, and the sweet aroma helped ease the initial awkwardness in the room. "When I walked into Sweet Bean Cafe that morning," Captain Chen began, her voice carrying clearly through the room, "I had no idea it would lead to this. But sometimes the most important changes start in unexpected places." In the front row, the elderly woman from the cafe, now identified as Mrs. Lee, a retired teacher, nodded in agreement. She had become an unexpected bridge between the police department and the senior community, helping organize safety workshops for older residents. "Today marks the beginning of our new approach," the captain continued, gesturing to the screens behind her. "Every officer will complete enhanced bias awareness training. But more importantly, they'll spend time in the communities they serve, not just during emergencies, but during everyday moments." Lieutenant Rivera clicked to the next slide, showing photos from their pilot program. Officers helping at community gardens, attending local council meetings, and participating in neighborhood cleanup events. Each image represented a small step toward rebuilding trust. "The coffee shop incident opened our eyes to problems that had been ignored for too long," Captain Chen explained. "But it also showed us something important. When people speak up and when others listen, real change is possible." At the back of the room, the college student whose video had gone viral sat with her laptop open, documenting the meeting for her journalism class. Her professor had encouraged her to turn her experience into a series about community policing reform. Officer Patel raised his hand from the middle of the room. "The monthly coffee chats with residents have been eye-opening," he shared. "Last week, I learned more about our neighborhood in 1 hour than I had in months of patrol." The captain smiled, remembering how the idea had started. Sweet Bean Cafe had offered to host regular meetings where officers and residents could talk informally. The idea had spread, and now 5 local coffee shops participated in the program. A community leader stood up next, her voice carrying years of experience. "We've seen programs come and go before," she said frankly. "What makes this different?" "Because this time, we're not just changing policies, we're changing culture," Captain Chen responded. "And we're giving everyone a stake in that change." She clicked to the next slide, revealing the new Civilian Oversight Committee structure. The room buzzed with approval as she explained how community members would work directly with officers to review procedures and handle complaints. The system that had buried Thompson's previous infractions was being replaced with one built on transparency and accountability. At a table near the window, Mrs. Thompson sat quietly, taking notes. After her husband's termination, she had volunteered to share their story with new recruits, a powerful reminder of how unchecked bias could destroy careers and damage communities. Change isn't just about punishing wrong actions, the captain continued, her voice softening. It's about creating opportunities for right ones. Every officer now has a community mentor, and every resident has a direct line to precinct leadership. She clicked to a photo of Sweet Bean Cafe, its windows now displaying a community-safe space sticker, part of a new program where local businesses partnered with the police to provide safe havens and build neighborhood connections. The morning sun streamed through the windows, catching dust motes in its beams just like it had that morning in the cafe. But now, instead of illuminating conflict, it shone on people working together for change. As the meeting moved into breakout sessions, Captain Chen watched officers and residents naturally grouping together, sharing ideas and experiences. The walls between us and them were slowly coming down, replaced by a growing understanding that community safety was everyone's responsibility. A young officer approached her with a suggestion about youth outreach programs. Two community leaders joined the conversation, adding their perspectives. This was exactly what she had hoped for, organic collaboration growing from the ashes of conflict. The coffee shop incident could have been just another negative headline, another reason for division. Instead, it had become a catalyst for the kind of change that couldn't be mandated from above, the kind that grew from people choosing to do better, to listen more, to work together. 6 months after that fateful morning at Sweet Bean Cafe, Captain Chen stood in front of the Police Academy's graduating class. The auditorium was filled with proud families watching their loved ones prepare to join the force. Sunlight streamed through the high windows, glinting off the newly polished badges that would soon be pinned on fresh uniforms. "Your training has been different from any class before you," she began, her voice carrying to the back row. "You're the first class to complete our new community-centered program. You've learned not just how to enforce the law, but how to serve the people who trust us with their safety." In the audience, she spotted familiar faces. Mrs. Lee, the elderly woman from the cafe, now taught cultural sensitivity workshops to cadets. The college student whose video had sparked change was there too, working on a documentary about police reform. They had all become part of a larger story of transformation. 6 months ago, an incident in a coffee shop showed us how much needed to change, the captain continued. Today, I'm proud to tell you that Officer Thompson's case has become a teaching moment in police academies across the country. His former precinct has undergone a complete leadership overhaul, and those who covered up his previous incidents have been held accountable. She paused, letting the weight of those words sink in. In the front row, a cadet raised her hand. What happened to Officer Thompson? He completed an intensive rehabilitation program, Captain Chen replied honestly. While he'll never wear a badge again, he's now working with police departments, sharing his story as a cautionary tale about unchecked bias and abuse of power. His journey from denial to accountability has become part of our training curriculum. The room was silent, absorbing this information. These new officers would enter their duties under a different system, one built on transparency and community trust. But this story isn't just about one officer's fall from grace, she continued. It's about how a community came together to create real change. Sweet Bean Cafe, where it all started, has become a model for our community bridge stations. Last month alone, 28 difficult situations were de-escalated through our coffee shop meditation program. She clicked to the next slide, showing statistics that brought hope. Civilian complaints had dropped by 40%. Community trust ratings had risen. Officer satisfaction scores were up as the new support systems helped them serve better and face less stress. Your badges come with power, she reminded the graduates. But true authority isn't in the medal you'll wear, it's in the trust you'll build. Each of you has spent time in our community immersion program. You've had dinner with local families, attended neighborhood meetings, and learned the stories of the people you'll serve. In the back of the room, Lieutenant Rivera stood with the training staff, nodding in agreement. The department's transformation had earned national attention, with other cities sending observers to learn from their experience. "Yesterday, I visited Sweet Bean Cafe," Captain Chen shared, her voice warming with the memory. The same barista who witnessed that confrontation 6 months ago now leads our youth outreach program. The cafe has become a place where officers and residents naturally mix, where conversations happen, where understanding grows. She looked out at the fresh faces before her, seeing hope for the future of law enforcement. "Your training has taught you that strength isn't in showing power, it's in knowing when not to use it. You've learned that respect isn't commanded by force, it's earned through consistent, fair treatment of everyone." As she concluded her speech, the captain reached into her pocket and pulled out a coffee sleeve from Sweet Bean Cafe. This simple coffee sleeve now carries our community promise: serving together, growing together. Let it remind you that the biggest changes often start with the smallest moments of choosing to do what's right. The ceremony continued with the badge pinning, each new officer reciting not just the standard oath, but also the new community pledge they had helped create during their training. Family members beamed with pride, knowing their loved ones would join a department committed to real change. Later, as Captain Chen watched the new officers celebrating with their families, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The incident that could have been just another sad headline had instead become a catalyst for lasting change. Not because of policies or procedures, but because people on all sides had chosen to turn a moment of conflict into an opportunity for growth. She checked her watch, just in time for her daily coffee run. Sweet Bean Cafe was waiting, and with it, the daily reminder that sometimes the best way to protect and serve was simply to listen, learn, and treat everyone with the dignity they deserve.